We're standing here on the corner of 58th and Wentworth. And as you see, the church building behind me is our former home of Southview Seventh-day Adventist Church. The church was purchased in 1958, and the genesis of that congregation came about when the Emmanuel Church, the Auditorium Church, and Minneapolis First Church combined to plant 3 new churches and maintain the presence at the Minneapolis First Church. So Minnetonka Church was planted, Northbrook, which now has become the Edge, and Southview Church was planted in that time frame around 1957, 1958. Southview moved in 1958. We were just looking at the purchase agreement. We paid $80,000 for this building. That's a funny number in 2023. $80,000. When we sold it, we got 10 times that much. That's quite a curiosity. The building came to our notice when Louis Thayer was working in the print shop, printing up circulars advertising the sale of this building. It was owned by Richfield Lutheran Church. One of their interesting side note, one of their main benefactors was the Bachman family, who owns the Bachman Nursery and flower store just down the street here. And every Sabbath for many years after we moved in, they would make sure and provide Southview Church with altar flowers to decorate our altar. I was one of the first children born into this church. We started with about 130, 140 members, and our first pastor was Roger Elstrom. We called him Elder Elstrom. My dad and him got along fabulously because they were both baseball fans, and we attended many of the Twins games when the Minnesota Twins moved to Minneapolis in 1961. The building was built in 1925, and that was just the main sanctuary part of the building. And then in 1948 or 1949, they broke ground on what they called the parish wing, or we called it the education wing, which is this square part of the building that juts out. And that's where we would have all of our Sabbath schools, Pathfinder Club meetings. There's a great room down in the lower level where we would have our Pathfinder meetings. The building worked out really well for us. So that's when it was built. It went through some renovations through the years. In 1983, we had a fire in the roof and ceiling of the sanctuary. It was an electrical fire determined by the fire inspectors. And after that fire, many of the members came together, reconditioned the woodwork, refinished the pews, actually stripped much of the wood fixtures that had been painted over through the years, and really made the sanctuary, restored it to its original beauty. And I'm sure many of you remember just what a lovely sanctuary that was. In the 2000s, about 2005, we installed a lift into the building, did some other renovations to make our bathrooms accessible. We had other projects. We actually had to do a mold mitigation project in Fellowship Hall, where we ripped down all of the walls in Fellowship Hall, removed the mold, re-sheetrocked, and redecorated Fellowship Hall. And those were the kinds of events that really brought the church family together, a lot of fellowship, a lot of pulling together, and just built some wonderful relationships. So in 1993, we started investigating what it would take to operate a school out of our church congregation. And one of the lovely ladies in our congregation, Chris Kelly, really drove that dream. In 1996, we established Southview Christian School in some rental property in Burnsville, Minnesota. And in 2001, we opened up Southview Christian School in our own building on County Road 5 in Burnsville. We found that property in 2000, early 2000, and it was a horse farm, a hobby farm with horse riding ring, horse barns. Pastor Donovan Davis was driving by one day, saw the for sale sign, looked at it, thought we should look at it. We purchased that property for $230,000. And I remember the Sabbath where we had to come up with the rest of the money. We were a sum short. I don't remember the sum, but we took up a special offering. And when Emmett Johnson counted that offering back in the deacon's room, it was exactly the amount that we needed to fulfill our obligation. And I remember standing there in awe, and Don Nelson stood there and looked at all of us men, and he said, "O ye of little faith." And he was talking to himself as much as the rest of us. That's a little bit of the history of Southview Christian School. In 2017, we made the decision to sell this building to a daycare. As you can see, the playground right out front. And we sold the building for $800,000. We didn't have a place to go, but Victor Picciotti started working the phones, and we landed at House of Prayer, where we're currently worshiping now. It was quite an adventure moving out. We thought we were going to have maybe a month or so to gather our things and get out. We got a phone call and learned that we literally needed to get out within the week. So we, again, gathered together as a congregation, packed up all our things, and pretty much in a couple of evenings, we got all of our stuff out, moved into House of Prayer, left some things in storage, put some pianos to bed in storage that we will retrieve someday. But that's pretty much the story that we have about this building. A lot of memories here, a lot of memories here. We had a full Pathfinder club, very active, very well known in the conference. You can see some of the trophies that we have found in our storage. That's a testament to the good work that the Pathfinders did in the 60s. And certainly one of my favorite memories was the ingathering time, which would start maybe in the beginning of October and go until almost Thanksgiving. We would gather here on Saturday and Sunday evenings in the fellowship hall, divide up into our teams, get in a car. We would always try to be in Dale Cady's car because he always made homemade peanut brittle that he would give to his ingatherers, and that was always a treat. We would ingather for a couple of hours, come back to the church and enjoy Alice Clark's soup, hot chocolate, and sandwiches. And as we were enjoying the meal, some of the elders of the church were tallying up the score, and we called it score because every car would tally up how much they collected that evening, and you always wanted to be on the top of the heap. Those were exciting times. And then at the end of the ingathering season, we would have a big banquet, and you would receive accommodations or awards for the amount of money that you raised in the ingathering campaign. And I remember Elder L. Clark, Bonnie Clark's father, he would always dress in his three-piece suit, and he had a nice watch chain that would be connected to his pocket watch, and we would always go up to Mr. Clark and say, Mr. Clark, can we see your watch? And he'd pull it out, just jolly old, oh, sure, and show us that cool watch. That was a nice memory. Okay, so we're here tonight looking at some of the historical documents from Southview Church. And pastors, I looked through this, there are just some really interesting documents. This is the original purchase agreement for the property at 58th and Wentworth. There was going to be a cash call of $24,000 to be paid by July 28th, 1958, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. And just so you know, we're going to have these documents available to look at as we celebrate our anniversary this weekend. But going through here, we've got a list of the 135 charter members, and an interesting list of just all of the charter members. And one thing we were talking about is these phone numbers like Tuxedo 16395. That's how we would delineate phone numbers back in the late 50s and 60s. Here's a letter that I just feel like it's important to read out loud for the congregation to hear. This is a letter that was written on June 4th, 1958 by our first pastor, George Elstrom. And I just think, well, I think a couple of things. I think it's interesting from the historical perspective, but it speaks to where we are in many ways. So let's go through this and see what you think. Members of Southview, Minneapolis, no, they hadn't named us yet. I got ahead. Members of the South Minneapolis Church, dear friends, this is a most important letter. Please study it carefully. We are now organized as the South Minneapolis Seventh-day Adventist Church with approximately 135 members. No longer are we the Auditorium, Emmanuel, or Stevens Avenue church members. And we are one in a new church in a new city area. Let us press together unitedly as a solid, well-organized group to serve God's purpose in the great south area of our city. As an organization, we can believe that God has called us together for such a time as this. Now, we have a working organization. Practically all of our church offices have been filled. Our church board has met once, at which time we gave study to the matter of acquiring a permanent church home. The support which all of you have manifested so far is greatly appreciated. Now it is important that we do all we can to obtain a church building of our own. This is important for two reasons. We need an appropriate church building for our worship center. We must have an attractive, suitable building which can serve as an evangelistic center in order to reach the thousands of South Minneapolis. In providing for such a building, we surely are carrying out God's will for the work in this great metropolitan area. Realizing the need of the South congregation, which would be organized on May 17th, our conference officers several weeks ago entered into a conditional purchase agreement with the Richfield Lutheran Church. In the event that our congregation wished to purchase this property, we would have something on which to work. The purchase agreement contains the following. We can have use of the building for Sabbath school and church each week from May 17th until July 26th, 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. This time was given to us to decide whether we wish to purchase the church. If we do not purchase the property, we would be charged $75 rent each week for the time we use the building. We will, after July 26th and for approximately 1.5 years, share the building with the Lutheran congregation, having specified days and times when each congregation will have the building for use. Our agreed days to use the building are as follows: Saturdays 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., Sundays 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., Tuesdays 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. During this 1.5-year period, while the Lutherans will be building their new church, we will have use of the pastor's study, and during our days in the building, we will have the use of the sanctuary, the classrooms, the kitchen facilities. The Lutherans will maintain their church office with the exception of Saturday, when we will have exclusive use of the building. After July 26, 1958, the deadline for our decision, we will then share the building with the understanding that we will pay the following expense during the time of our joint use. So it goes on to talk about how they would share the expenses for operating the building. And then the pastor ends the letter as follows. Dear fellow members, next Sabbath, July 26th, we urge our members to give a sacrificial offering to help meet the first sizable payment on the Lutheran Church property, which is due July 28th. The payment is in the amount of $24,000. We yet need $9,306 in order to meet this payment. While we cannot give of this amount by next Sabbath, we must borrow. Pray earnestly about your part in this offering. Come prepared to give as large an offering as possible to meet the $9,306. We are all impressed with the Lutheran Church property. We believe God is moving in this direction. He will bless if we do all we can to acquire this property. This is God's work. Let us do what we can in providing for Him a house in the South Minneapolis area. He will reward your efforts. Thank you in advance for your liberal support. In His service, George R. Elstrom. What a letter, and how poignant to where we're at currently at Southview Church. This is an interesting book. We've got some pictures of us. It has an Easter service picture here. You're certainly going to want to take a look at this book. We'll have it out in the narthex somewhere. This is an interesting document. This is a loan bond, and what did we learn? There were 120 of these. After the initial $24,000 was paid, there was a $60,000 promissory note to the Lutheran Church, and every time a $500 payment was made, presumably every month, they would receive one of these bonds until they had paid all 120 of them. That's quite a fascinating document. You know, we have the list of the original charter members. We've got another interesting letter to read from the Reverend at the Lutheran Church, Reverend H.T. Rasmussen. And this was a letter when the Lutheran Church was preparing to move out and turn the building completely over to Southview. Dear Pastor Elstrom, this is to verify the conversation our parish administrator, Mr. Masters, had with you last week to the effect that on April 3rd, 1960, we plan to dedicate our new church building at 8 West 60th Street. That was just right down Lyndale Avenue from the 58th and Wentworth location. We will use your church as a meeting place for the last time on the morning of April 3rd. During that week, we will finish moving our furnishings, our equipment out of the building as quickly as possible. Some of us will be packing up during the day, and men with trucks will be hauling during the evening until the work is done. We thought you would like to know our schedule so you can plan accordingly. I wish to express my personal appreciation that of your whole congregation for the kindness and cooperation you have offered us in all of these months we have shared the building. Your people have been most considerate, and we wish you would convey our thanks to them. What a nice letter. And that just goes to show you that this renting thing isn't all that new. Just going through these documents, there's a lot of financial documents. There is, monthly reports, monthly financial reports. And as we go through, we find a bulletin, and these are what our bulletins used to look like, and they were hours on this, all the participants. And this must have been Elder Elstrom's copy, because he has got it noted where everybody is sitting on the platform. That's interesting. I didn't notice that before. The Southview Seventh-day Adventist Church was organized May 17, 1958, as a result of a citywide church reorganization program. Members forming this new congregation came from the Auditorium, Emmanuel, Stevens Avenue churches. The congregation shared the church building with the former owners until April 1960. The church adopted the name Southview because as a congregation it wished to be sensitive to the needs of the unwarned in the South Minneapolis and South suburban area. To this end, the hearts of the members and the facilities of this church center are dedicated. Yellow manila type paper. And this is from the dedication Sabbath, so that would mean that by July 7, 1962, in about 3 years, they had paid off the entire $60,000 or $85,000 purchase price. It's just amazing to read some of the names in here. Roy Jorgensen must have been our organist at the time. I don't remember that name. Elder Peterson, he must have been one of the Southview elders. But then Elder Nightingale, I remember that name, and I want to think that perhaps he was a conference elder. I'm not 100% sure. Elder C.H. Lauda was the speaker that day, presented the sermon, and he was the conference president. And there were many other conference workers and union workers here. There was somebody here, Elder Witzas from the Union Conference. Elder P.F. Peterson was from the Minnesota Conference, a home missionary and Sabbath school secretary. We had a lot of conference officials back in that day. Had the treasurer of the Minnesota Conference, Elder Ervil Rush. Scott's grandfather, Louis Thayer, was the head elder and was the Southview elder in charge that day. Just an incredible part of history of Southview on the day that we dedicated that church back in 1962. Let's see what else we have. Again, just a lot of historical documents. Nominating committee reports. This is from 1960. Church report, our church clerk reports, our insurance certificates from, way back then, 1968. And then just some more, there's an architectural drawing here of the church, what it was intended to look like. They must have forgot to build that part of the tower there. Some pictures with Christmas decorations. This is really an interesting book. We have a list of pastors here. Of course, Elder Elstrom was our first pastor. He served till 66. James Upchurch, Don Schneider, Gideon Haas. Gideon Haas is the pastor that baptized me. I was telling Pastor Sean and Marty earlier that He was a real preacher from the pulpit. You've heard the term hellfire and brimstone. I think that was fair of Gideon Haas. But I really did appreciate him. I told an anecdote as he was preparing me for baptism. I would go over to his house. We'd do some yard work before the Bible study. And then as we had finished up the study, he did something that I really appreciated. He took me to a Jewish synagogue for their worship service, and that was really a cultural experience that it stays with me to this day. Arthur Dahl, Kenneth Brown, Rob Vandeman. I think Rob Vandeman, you still have your chance, Pastor Sean, but I think many of the congregation would remember Robert Vandeman as their favorite pastor, along with George Elstrom. Jerry Jacobson, Bill Wilson, Steve Schultz, and then that's where the list stops. And I'm not sure if there was a bridge between Steve Schultz and Don Davis. That's something that we'll know later today for sure. But you know, in my term as an elder, we had Don Davis, Jim Heiner, Dustin Hall, and now Pastor Sean. So that's a fairly complete list of our pastoral leadership. And then just some wonderful pictures. We used to empty out of the sanctuary through the front doors and congregate on the steps. I see Emmett Johnson in the picture. I see John Soderstrom in the picture. I see I see my Grandpa Kelly. Oh dear. If you want to have a grandpa, you want to have a Grandpa Kelly. Very nice. Very nice. Here's a picture of Elder Elstrom and Louis Thayer burning the, what is it, loan agreement?
Loan, yeah.
You know, that was when they had paid off the loan. And then another picture of just all the congregation. And you can see in this picture, and you certainly want to look, that the corbels that the chandeliers hung from down the side, any of you that worshiped in that space would remember that they were beautiful oak. Well, after the fire, all those got stripped of the latex wall paint that they had put on it and were, you know, refinished to the beautiful oak that we had there for the longest time, as well as the Jesus stained glass window back behind the altar. A clever painter actually faux finished that to make that look like oak, because it was just you know, paint grade wood. And we had stripped, Don Nelson and I stripped all of these grids up by the organ pipes, and we returned those to oak as well. And here's another picture of Elder Elstrom holding the document as they burn it. Just tremendous photographs right from the Genesis. Right from the Genesis.
The mortgage paper.
The mortgage, yep. And that looks as fancy as the bond document that we have. Let's see if we can make out anybody in the congregation here.
I assume that's the same Sabbath when they burn the mortgage paper.
Well, this wasn't.
I mean the congregation paper.
This, yeah, I'm thinking that too.
That's notable here too, as you can see the wood is all painted in that view.
Yeah. But I can't really make out I'm looking, we would always sit back in this area somewhere. I can't make anything out. You know what? That's me. I'm probably between 14 and 15 years old right there. Well, looking at the shoes, probably 15 years old. Those were really some strange shoes I was wearing. I'm wondering, talking to a fetching lass here, I wonder who they were. I'm going to keep this picture. It's funny though that I noticed Grandpa,
You can take it out.
and I looked right by me standing there.
We have one more copy, right? I think I've seen it before.
Yeah, there's a couple more here. Boy, I wish I could remember who that was. I think this is John Miller here. So, some words to leave you by on our 65th anniversary. I would encourage you to hear the words of our founders as they answered God's call. And we can see their answer of the call in the name of Southview and the ministry that they engaged in the South Metro area. So let's recommit to that call of service in our community, to those who need to hear the good news of the gospel. That's our commission.